Hello there, my name is Relo Kai with Butcherbird Productions, and last month I made a poll to see which video you guys would be more interested in, a Blender Builds video or a Kerbal Space Program 1 video. The vote wasn't even close, with the Blender Builds video winning unanimously. Go check that out if you haven't already, links are in the top right and the description. This month, however, has been busy, and I haven't had a lot of time to make videos, so I decided to quickly put together that Kerbal Space Program video for you guys, and, well, here it is. I had been doing my first science mode playthrough, and I decided to make my first SSTO, or single stage to orbit spacecraft. For those that don't know, an SSTO is basically what it says on the tin, a spacecraft that doesn't need to stage or separate any of its components to get into orbit like a traditional rocket. They usually take the form of a plane, and the biggest upsides to using one are cost effectiveness and reusability. However, there have been no fully realized SSTOs in real life, although many prototypes have been made. The most recent and promising one is Skylon, which is still in the prototyping stage. In Kerbal Space Program, SSTOs are easier to make because you need less delta V to get into orbit around Kerbin, the game's Earth analog. Normally, when you would make an SSTO in Kerbal Space Program, you would use the R.A.P.I.E.R engines to help your SSTO into orbit. Why the R.A.P.I.E.R? The main reason is it has two modes, open cycle and closed cycle. When in open cycle, the engine uses the oxygen in the atmosphere to ignite the engine, while in closed cycle it uses oxidizer like a regular rocket engine. This allows it to function equally well in both atmosphere and in space, and it saves on fuel as well. However, when I was making my SSTO, I didn't have the R.A.P.I.E.R unlocked yet, and my best jet engines were the Panthers. But I was determined to make an SSTO with my limited part selection, so I made this, the Raven 3. Why 3? Because the previous versions were many variations of scuffed. It doesn't do much more than get into orbit and back, but I wanted an orbital fighter jet look, and I was trying to get my methodology down. I had enough delta V to get into space, but I was having trouble with my flight path. I eventually found a method that works for me, and while it may not be the correct way, it seems to work just fine. So, here's how I got this thing into space. Starting out on the runway, I ignited the Panthers and kept them in dry or normal mode, and I kept the Kodiaks off to save fuel for later. I also right-clicked the Panther and pinned the pop-up so I can see my current thrust. Then, once I lifted off, I immediately set the Panthers to wet or afterburner mode and set my pitch to 10 degrees. Now I'm waiting for my thrust to plateau. Once it plateaus, I ignite the Kodiaks and increase my pitch to 15 degrees. I then open the maneuver tab in the bottom left here so I can see my apoapsis, or the highest point of my orbit. I'm waiting until it reaches 80 kilometers, and then I shut off my engines. Now I make a maneuver node and circularize. And now I'm in orbit. Time to come back down. I made another maneuver node and aimed for the desert for a nice flat landing. I spun out on re-entry, but then I landed without much issue. And that's the Raven 3. If you notice, the time it takes to get to orbit is long because the Raven 3 doesn't have a lot of thrust, so its speed is relatively low. But since then, I've unlocked the Rapier and the Whiplash, so I've made the Raven 4. It's essentially the same ship, but with the upgraded engines. Let's see how it performs. Yeah, it's much faster. Amazing what happens when you use the intended parts for the project. And that's it. Hope you found it somewhat entertaining. Kerbal Space Program is one of those games that I had always heard of but never got into until recently, and I've been having a lot of fun with it. If you're wondering why I'm playing the original 8-year-old game instead of the sequel that just came out in February, it's because KSP2 is currently in a very unpolished state in early access, so I'm playing the cheaper, more functional of the two. If you never gave this game a try, I highly recommend it, and the Steam Summer Sale is currently on, so I'm sure it's discounted nicely. But that's it from me, so leave a like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the other side.